Will Washington surprise people in the Big Ten in year one? Lots of turnover, new roster, new coach, new staff. Let's talk about it. Roman Tomashoff, Locked On Huskies, joining me here on the show. What's the state of Washington's roster right now?
Spencer, there's honestly a lot to be excited about with this roster. It's a young roster, after, as you and I just discussed, losing 20 starters from last year's run to the national championship is going to hurt anybody. But we've seen a lot of nice pieces come in. Ephesians Prysock, the cornerback from Arizona, is one of the top transfers. Jonah Coleman, the running back, obviously retaining Will Rogers, retaining Drew Azzopardi, the left tackle from San Diego State, retaining Jeremiah Hunter, the transfer from Cal, who's just, I think he's got the potential to be one of the best receivers in the Big Ten this upcoming season. There really is a lot to be excited about. There's still some holes on the roster. There's still questions that need to be answered along the offensive line, maybe another defensive tackle, but there's a lot of youth. There's a lot of promise, and there's still some names that, were big parts of Washington's run to the national championship last year, like Elijah Jackson, like Carson Bruner, and Alfonso Tupatal at linebacker. And then a guy who didn't really get to play any sort of part in that, but was awesome in 2022 in running back Cameron Davis, who's going to be back from an injury that he suffered before the season started. So there's still a lot of reason to be excited. I like this coaching staff, and there's just a lot of guys on this roster that are really chomping at the bit to step up and have their chance to contribute.
I think the staff moves that Jedd Fisch has made have been good. It's a very NFL-centric group. You've got Brennan Carroll, the son of Pete Carroll. You've got Steve Belichick, the son of course, Bill Belichick, because I don't know that there's anybody else with that last name, at least that I'm aware of in the football coaching world. But the last that people probably heard from this Washington roster was, well, they've lost 20 or 21 or 22 starters from what they had last year, and DeBoer's gone. Everything's in chaos. And sure, it's definitely a ground roots build-up job for Jedd Fisch and company. Like that's what they have to do. But if you just look at some of the key spots, Will Rogers, Jonah Coleman, Jeremiah Hunter, I could find a number of quarterback, running back, receiver combos in the Big Ten next year that are worse than those three guys. I think Hunter is fantastic coming over from Cal. We know Jonah Coleman is very good. Will Rogers, I don't know that his ceiling is that high, but an experienced quarterback who's thrown in a Mike Leach offense is going to have a very high floor. Who's blocking for these guys?
So that's a very good question, where Drew Azzopardi, as I mentioned, was one of the top-rated transfers coming out of San Diego State. He's probably going to man the left tackle spot. And then somebody that I'm really high on who won't be practicing in the spring, but I would expect to be ready by the start of fall camp, by the start of the season, is offensive lineman Gard Memelar, who honestly had a shot to start in this past season in 2023 before he suffered an injury in fall camp. Those are probably going to be the left side of the line. And then there are going to be 3 open spots there that we'll see what happens through spring, what happens with the fall. Washington's getting a late start on the spring practice. They're not starting till the beginning of April, just kind of at the very end of the window where it's recommended for teams to start. And one of the reasons is that Jedd Fisch is still looking to bring in some guys along the offensive line. And I wouldn't be surprised if, as some names trickle into the transfer portal here in April, or as we get into April, I don't know what time is in it anymore. It's early March now, and that blows my mind. But as we get into that next transfer portal window, I wouldn't be surprised if, they go after Branson Hickman from SMU to man the center position for his final season, or Marcus Bryant, their tackle, who is also looking to get in the transfer portal after being all AAC last season. So there are still some names that, and obviously there are names that we don't even know that could be out there just yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are 3 transfer players manning those spots, or even 2. And then, somebody like former 4-star recruit Elijah Jaquette maybe competes and earns a spot in the spring, or 2 high upside redshirt freshmen in Kaylee Tafai or Sione Fasolo, who are really promising, really big bodied, raw guys that have an opportunity to really make a name for themselves this spring.
By the way, we're technically in the middle of March. If you cut it up into 3 segments in a 31-day month, 10, 10, and 10, we're into the middle of March now. Technically speaking, I agree. Time is a social construct and doesn't mean anything. But I think for Washington, they have done a pretty solid job of, much like Alabama, and a guy who we shall not mention for this particular segment, has kind of stabilized the roster a bit. But can they go into the Big Ten and surprise people? Because the expectation, as I talked about nationally, is that, they're going to be a big pullback team. And yeah, I expect them to pull back, but will they go all the way back to where TCU went? and be a 5-7 team? I would think not, because I look at the schedule, Roman. I see bare minimum, worst case scenario, 5 wins, and I don't think that that's where I would pick Washington's record to end up. Their win total on FanDuel is 7.5. Last time the Huskies had a first-year head coach, an experienced transfer quarterback, and a win total of 7.5, they went 11-2 in the Pac-12. I'm not picking that here. I don't think that's going to play out. But is Washington being overlooked as a team that, could make some noise, could give a team a loss that they're not expecting this year? They have a lot of heavy hitters on their schedule.
I would certainly say so, because when you look at some of the just the way the schedule falls, where early on it's Eastern Michigan, it's Weber State, before you get to the Apple Cup, which will be held at Lumen Field this season, which I'm personally very excited about. And then after that, it's Northwestern and Rutgers, where, you got to go to Piscataway, and that's going to be tough going across the country. But when you look at that, and you're also going back to Jedd Fisch's home state, so that's pretty fun. But when you look at that, there is a legitimate chance that this team could start 5-0. And then as you look at the FanDuel total, you only need 3 more wins to get there. And, there's a UCLA on your schedule. Indiana's on the schedule. Iowa's always a tough out, but that's certainly a winnable game for this team, where if you look at that, you look at just the remaining 7 games in the schedule: Michigan, USC, Oregon. Those are going to be really tough, but there's still 4 other games on there where you look at it and you say, yeah, I can see this team going 8-4. I can see them going 9-3 and surprising with an upset victory over a USC or somebody. It's certainly very possible. And with the experience that Jedd Fisch has, with what he was able to do at Arizona, we know how good his scheme is. And it's something that really does impress me when you talked about the coaching staff a little bit earlier. This scheme is going to play very, very well at the college level. And it's obviously something we won't see until the fall, but something I'm really looking forward to watching.
With how Washington has worked to reload, we'll see what they do in the spring. I don't think 5-0 is off the table, but between Washington State at a neutral site, but it's in Seattle, so essentially a home game for the Huskies, Northwestern at home, who was a bowl team last year that went into the Vegas Bowl and beat Kyle Whittingham and the Utes, are going at Rutgers. I don't think that that's a lock sequence of events to all be wins for Washington. I think they're capable. But I don't know that I'd rule out a loss in those first 5 games. But then the back half of their schedule, boy, it gets tough fast. Michigan at Iowa. Then you have to go at Indiana after a bye. I think they'll be fine there in Bloomington. But then they come back home. USC, who I think is a better team. At Penn State, who I also think is a better team. Host UCLA. I think Washington's better than the Bruins. You go at Oregon, and the Ducks, I think, have got the better roster. And that game is being played in Eugene. How many wins can Washington fans expect to get in the second half of the year? What would a good number be?
For those second 7 games, I would say if they can manage 3 wins, that's really great. Because that involves, maybe winning at Iowa. I don't think that they can go into Penn State and win. That's going to be a really, really tough game. But when you just look at what that schedule is, USC and UCLA are both at home. So, we've seen crazier things happen in Husky Stadium than beating whatever USC might be ranked this year, and beating them in the top 5 and everything. It's all happened before. So I would say that 3 wins is kind of where my expectation would be, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a 4th in there somewhere. That being said, 9-3 does kind of feel like the ceiling for where this team might be. It's something that my co-host Lars Hansen and I have talked about over on Lockdown Huskies. It's very realistic to see an 8-4, a 9-3, and with a couple more pieces along the offensive line, this team really is something to be excited about moving into the Big Ten.
Roman Tomashoff, Locked On Huskies, coming by here to talk all things dogs up there in Montlake. Roman, thanks so much.
Spencer, as always, thanks for having me.
A lot of changes in college football over the last couple of years. Most of them stink. These latest ones don't.